So welcome everyone officially to our workshop today on Wicked Information Literacy. We are so glad that you are here today. So my name is Jane Hammonds. I am the Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian in the Ohio State University Libraries. My email is hammonds.73@osu.edu. If you do have any questions, concerns, problems after the workshop, please feel free to go ahead and send me an email. Happy to talk more about information literacy with you. I'm super excited today to have a co-presenter, my former colleague and my friend, Andrea Brooks, and I will let her introduce herself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm very excited to be here. My name's Andrea Brooks. My title is Assessment and Pedagogy Librarian at Northern Kentucky University. As Jane said, we used to work together. Fun fact, actually, Jane, you might have seen her black cat in the background there. Lucky was my cat, and my son developed allergies and asthma, and Jane rescued Lucky several years ago. So it's really fun that I get to still check in and see Lucky sometimes. My email is there as well, brooksa2@nku.edu. So I will talk a little bit now about the workshop, our goals for this session. We definitely are going to talk about what it means to be a wicked student, and we'll go even a step further than that and talk about what it means to be a wicked information literate student. And then we also will talk about some strategies and ideas that we have when it comes to developing and supporting wicked information literacy instruction. A lot of the ideas that we'll talk about really stem from credit-bearing courses. So that's kind of the frame that we're coming at this with. However, Jane and I have talked quite a bit as well about how some of these ideas could definitely be applicable to one-shot sessions. But just know that when we're sharing a lot of these ideas, a lot of it does stem from that credit-bearing perspective. So this presentation stems from a conversation that Jane and I had at a conference earlier this year about a book I had read called Creating Wicked Students by Paul Hanstead. At the time, I was part of an educator learning community at NKU. A few of us had all read this book. We discussed it throughout the semester, and then we were implementing components of it into our teaching. And I saw so many connections between this book and information literacy, and especially the goals that we have when we're teaching information literacy to develop responsible information consumers and information creators, and not only in the academic setting, right, but when they graduate and enter those other spaces. So Jane, I was telling her about this book, and a few weeks later, she tells me she read it. And it might have been a couple of months later, I don't remember, but not too long after she had read this book. And so we started talking some more about it and how it was influencing our own courses. And so from there, we actually wrote an article, which we just learned this week was accepted for publication into College and Research Libraries News. So you'll be able to read some more details in that in a couple of months. But we do recommend that you read the book. It's a wonderful book, but we did want to do this presentation as a way to share some of those practical takeaways that we've had when it comes to teaching in an information literacy environment. Okay, so we're going to move into talking about what it means to be a wicked student. You've heard Jane mention this. This is the title of the presentation. So we'd like to start with a quick reflection. You should have the links to the Jamboard there up in the chat. And we just want you to take a minute to reflect. So we've been talking about this idea of a wicked student. What do you think that means? What is a wicked student? What skills or concepts would they have? What would a wicked student be able to do? And I will give you all a couple of minutes to do that.
And you should all be able to access the Jamboard. If you're not, let us know in the chat. If you have not added anything to a Jamboard before, the easiest way to do that is to go over here on the left-hand side. You'll see the option here to add a sticky note. You can click on that sticky note and you can add your response there. So if you're not seeing the Jamboard or you're not able to access it, just let us know.
No idea, that is fair. And I see David put something in the chat to solve wicked problems. Absolutely. We'll talk a little bit about this idea of wicked problems also. Oh, I love whoever just wrote, be a conceptual blockbuster. Wow. Consider multiple perspectives, think outside the box, think beyond the confines of an assignment, begin to know what we know, be able to dwell in complexity. Yeah, complexity is a big part of a wicked student. Understand that they have power. Michael just put that in the chat. Definitely, we will talk about wicked students are students who have this sense of authority. So understanding that, absolutely. Comfortable with open-ended questions, challenge and question norms, absolutely. Think for themselves. I might have said that one already.
Like to think creatively and transgressively.
Yes. And someone, it's kind of small for me to see on the screen, but someone wrote, you know, the perspective that wicked can mean excellent, cool, great, absolutely. So an excellent student. Yeah. And I think if you look up the definition of wicked, right, the first thing that comes up, of course, is evil. And that's not what we're talking about here. But there is that slang version of wicked, meaning excellent, awesome. A wicked student can discern credible and logical information from non-credible information using those threshold concepts. Blow our socks off with their mad research skills. Yes. Yeah, not having the answer, but multiple answers that can be flexible. Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you all so much for the engagement. That's awesome. I am going to turn now to talk a little bit about how Hanstead describes wicked students in his book. So he actually opens his book with this assumption that what we all want for our students is for them to be capable of changing the world, right? And I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that. And he does go on to explain that that change doesn't necessarily have to be huge, right? And I see David's comment that that's a pretty tall order, right? But we're not talking about, you know, all of our students becoming the president, but that our students go into their professional or personal communities with the ability to make decisions in an informed and thoughtful manner, so that they are positively impacting the society around them. Kate just wrote, every small step counts. Exactly. So he does make the point that it doesn't have to be huge change. And so he points out, Jane, you can go to the next slide. He points out that, you know, we and our students, we all live in this very fluid world full of complicated, full of wicked problems. And by that, he means, you know, no matter what your profession is, no matter what path our students are choosing to pursue, the parameters are always changing. So technology is changing, tools are changing, the knowledge that we know is constantly being built upon. And so he argues that we need to have wicked students. And these are students who know they're capable of contributing, shaping, and impacting that world around them. And this is where the idea then of authority comes in. And we saw this on some of those Jamboard comments talking about students knowing that they are capable of making decisions, solving problems, knowing that they can make a difference. So for Hanstead, it's not enough to simply teach, and I shouldn't say simply, but not enough to teach skills and concepts. The concepts and the content that we are teaching is important, but he says another piece to that teaching ingredient is developing this sense of authority in our students. And by doing this, it's, you know, we're developing this belief in our students that they can write or rewrite an existing narrative and produce change. And so to do this as educators, we should be putting our students in situations where they need to assume authority, so that they're invited to solve increasingly complex problems. We allow them to sometimes fail in a safe environment, because when we do that, that also then gives them the opportunity to realize they can get back up, right, and try it again. So that kind of is a big picture overview of what Hanstead writes about for several chapters. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this point about what it means to be a wicked student?
Kate added change as life in perpetual beta.
Where did the term come from? Sherry, that's a good question. So he actually points to, I believe it's Edmund Coe, who was a general education scholar and came up, I believe Edmund Coe talked about the idea of wicked problems. And Hansted builds on that, and he references Coe in his chapters.
So if other questions or comments do come up, please go ahead and continue adding those into the chat, and we'll go ahead and move on. So Hansted himself doesn't talk about information literacy. It's not really a focus of the book. He's talking about, as Andrea mentioned, sort of the course design process in general, any types of courses that you might be teaching. But Andrea and I really wanted to bring this, as librarians, bring this back to information literacy and think about what it actually means to think about wicked information literacy as a term, and what wicked information literate students are able to do. So just to get everyone on the same page, I'm going to share a couple definitions, and I know that many of you, those folks that are librarians, will already be familiar with those, but we do have a wide range of folks in the workshop today, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone has these definitions as well. So this is the definition of information literacy that is presented in the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education, which was developed by the Association of College and Research Libraries. And they really highlight information literacy as this set of integrated abilities, and they incorporate the reflective discovery of information, but also these understandings about information. So how information is produced, how it's valued, I would add shared there as well. And then they really emphasize, students emphasize this all as information consumers, but also information creators. That last part, really creating new knowledge, participating ethically in communities of learning. And communities of learning can be broadly defined of what exactly constitutes a community of learning. So this definition, as the librarians in the audience will know, was a big change from previous definitions of information literacy that were more skill-based. And this really tries to highlight the conceptual understandings that students need about information, about the information environment that we live in. Beyond this, we also wanted to highlight this concept of critical information literacy. And what we mean when we talk about critical information literacy is, oftentimes information literacy is more about sort of teaching students how to effectively interact and engage within the information environment that we live in. So sort of accepting what it is and learning how to engage in that environment. Critical information literacy really emphasizes this point that the information environment that we live in, the processes by which information is created and shared and accessed, that those are influenced by different power structures. They are involved in sort of this oppressive system in terms of not everyone has access to the same information. Not everyone has the ability to use information to create change. And so it really encourages us as educators to think about how we can help our students to identify what those power structures are, to identify the ways in which our current environment is creating these oppressions, and to challenge those, to not just accept things as they are, but to start to create that change. So some responses coming in. We'll address that question in just a second, Michael. So we wanted to think about that then in terms of wicked information literacy. So we talked a little bit in our first discussion board about what wicked students are able to do. Now we wanted to make this more specific. What do we mean when we talk about wicked information literacy? What are wicked information literate students able to do? So keeping those definitions in mind, what do we think about wicked information literacy? So we're going to go ahead and go out to our Jamboard again, and I'll go ahead and access that. Hopefully everyone is seeing the Jamboard again. So you can change the Jamboard up here at top. You'll see the arrows that you can use. You can go to the next frame, and here's our second question is, How would you describe wicked information literacy? So keeping those definitions that we talked about in mind, or what is a wickedly information literate student able to do? And I'll put the links to the Jamboard in there just in case folks need to access them. And so we'll give everyone a chance to think about this and share their own sort of definition or description of wicked information literacy. So some of the responses that we've got coming in, and again, feel free to continue to add your responses. So take a creative approach to source selection. Not every project requires peer-reviewed papers, especially exclusively. I love that point, right? Recognizing that there are going to be a variety of different types of sources that can provide useful, helpful, relevant information. And we don't necessarily have to always stick with the peer-reviewed traditional scholarly sources that we see. Yeah, love that response. Challenge traditional structures like peer review that leave out certain voices. Yeah, love that as well. And I think that aligns with this idea of we've put, scholarly sources up on this, pedestal. And do they really always deserve to be up there? And who are we missing when that's the only type of information that we are relying on or looking at? Let's see. Wicked information literacy students can both assess the various information ecologies that currently exist while they analyze and evaluate those. Yes, absolutely. Look outside your discipline for transferable solutions. Love that one as well. So openness to those different perspectives, those different voices. Absolutely. Willing to connect what they already have as an asset with the new information they encounter to create new information. Yes, right? Absolutely. Consider how visual artifacts or arguments might contribute to the problem at hand. So look for a better solution, not necessarily the best. Critically examine, question, and evaluate information. Yeah, these are some great responses, right? That this idea that not just kind of sticking to the one way of doing research that is often taught, that there's certain types of sources that we always rely on. There's this process that we always rely on, but thinking critically about those and challenging those if needed, right? Challenging that idea that only peer-reviewed sources are the only ones that we can use, or understanding what the alternatives to peer review might be. A similar response could be something like thinking about the copyright laws and thinking, are those really, do we need to challenge copyright laws? Are there other ways that we can go about sharing information that would not restrict certain people from having access? So yeah, I think that you're getting that sort of in this response, just being open to new perspectives, new information, new sources, looking outside the box, going back to those responses that we got with the initial Jamboard. Oh, sorry, Lucky. So Michael added, information is magic, you are a witch, so is everyone else. What do you do with that? What spells will you cast? And what spells are being cast on you? Yeah, thank you, Michael, that's great. Wonderful, so I'm gonna go ahead and we'll go back to our presentation here. So this is sort of the understanding of wicked information literacy that we were working with, and I think that we got this in the responses that you all were sharing, so that students are having this opportunity or having this ability to be authoritative, right? So as Andrea was saying, to recognize their own authoritative voices, to do things actively to create change in the situations that we're in, the environment that we're in. So challenging those structures that create and provide access to information, Andrea mentioned facing these increasingly complex information problems where it's not that you can simply say, this is a good source or this is a bad source, but that it's going to be complex. It's going to be based on the context, the situation that you find yourself in. You can't just have easy answers to what good sources are or what the right way to search is. And then seeking and applying information to applicable and relevant audiences. So that's sort of the understanding that we put together about what wicked information literacy is. And again, I think that aligns with the comments that folks were sharing in the chat as well. So we'll pause there again to see if anyone has any additional questions or comments related to this idea of wicked information literacy. Kate shared, to be wicked, you need to practice, practice, practice. Okay, so keep the questions and comments coming in the chat, and we'll go ahead and move on to our next section. So for this part, we wanted to talk about some strategies and some activities that we might be able to use to think about how we can support our students in developing wicked information literacy. So these are built on Hansted's work. So you'll find examples of these guidelines and activities if you do go ahead and check out that book. So one thing that Hansted really talks about is how important it is to start off by thinking about our course goals and how we can make those course goals wicked. So, how we can create those goals in ways that encourage our students to engage with content or with information so that their sense of authority is being developed, right? So that we're supporting them to develop that sense of authority, to share their own voice, right? And so he really emphasizes how important it is to think carefully about the course goals and the verbs that we use related to our specific course goals. So to give you all a couple of examples, here's two different course goals. Course goal 1 is, I think, one that you would see in a lot of information literacy courses across the country. So students will be able to identify multiple forms of misinformation. So you'll probably see something like this, in a lot of courses, and this is an important goal, right? There's no doubt about it that it's important that students are able to identify misinformation. But this goal doesn't really give students any opportunity to develop their sense of authority, right? So if we look at goal number 2, students will be able to create an awareness campaign to help other freshmen learn about the dangers of misinformation, right? This is a goal that requires students to assume that sense of authority, right? They are going to do something rather than just having, identify, but they would still have to know what misinformation is. They would have to be able to identify multiple forms of misinformation, but they would go beyond just that identification. And they're actually then doing something to support helping others learn about this topic. So they're having that their own sense of authority being developed with this. So we wanted to give you all an opportunity to think about how you might refine a course goal to make it more wicked. So we have the following course goal. Students will be able to define plagiarism and recognize examples. So we'd like everyone to take a minute. We have another Jamboard, so we'll go out to the Jamboard there again, and let folks take a turn at, if you feel comfortable, revising that course goal to try to make it more wicked. So the original goal is students will be able to define plagiarism and recognize examples. What is some way that we could transform that so that it would be giving students that sense of authority? So we'll let folks share their thoughts there. Take a look at the comments coming in the chat. So Michael shared, is there actually an association in the book with Wicked Witch, or is that just in my head? I don't think he actually talks about Wicked Witches in the book, if I can't remember. We need a Wicked Bloom's taxonomy. Love that idea, Kate. Yeah, absolutely. And Kate also shared a research the News Literacy Project has developed Rumor Guard. I'll have to take a look at that. we'll give everyone just a few more seconds. If anyone does have any ideas of how they might refine or revise that outcome to make it more wicked. So we see some responses coming in. So students will develop strategies to recognize and avoid plagiarism. Students understand what plagiarism is, why it is bad, and teach other students not to plagiarize, right? So I love that adding that teaching part in there, right? That really is showing that students are developing that sense of authority, right? Absolutely. Something about being able to identifying the underlying assumptions about knowledge, intellectual property. Yeah, I like that. So sort of looking beyond just sort of the easy definitions of what plagiarism is and thinking about what are the assumptions that are actually being made about knowledge and intellectual property as we think about definitions. Students will be able to make an argument to others as to why plagiarism is problematic. So instead of defining and recognizing, let's have them create comparative charts of what plagiarism looks like versus ethical use of sources for online publication. Yeah, so they're creating something, right? They're creating those charts, and they have to understand what plagiarism is to be able to do that. But now they're being much more active, right? And they're creating a resource so that they're helping to develop that sense of authority. Responses coming in. So split into two teams, one who writes something which is plagiarized and give it to the other team who tries to catch them. So again, making it more active. Students will create a mock morning interview featuring someone who plagiarized, sharing what their life was like and the repercussions that they face. Yeah, that's a really creative way to go about thinking about it.
I'll add, I like that pink one, that students will be able to properly use sources to enrich their own work. I think that just gets at that bigger idea of what you want them to be able to do. I mean, you have to be able to identify and cite sources to do that, but yeah, it gets at that bigger concept. You might have said that one already, Jane.
No, I don't think I did actually. Yeah. So yeah, thank you all for sharing these examples. So ways to just take a good goal. It's a good goal for students to be able to define plagiarism and recognize examples. But what can we do to take it that one step further to require students to start developing that sense of authority? And these are some really good examples of that. So we'll go ahead and go back to our presentation here. So here's some examples that I thought up related to this. So one of the things you could do is, take your unit institution's definition of plagiarism and have students revise it and update it. Maybe it hasn't been updated in a while, or maybe it's one of those very punitive perspectives on plagiarism, and we want to change that to one that supports more the idea of citing sources about scholarship as a conversation, and kind of flipping the sort of narrative a little bit about plagiarism. Another thing students could talk about, right? So plagiarism, an issue is on campus. Students have to explain why that is and justify the creation of a position that is going to be focused specifically on supporting students related to plagiarism and citations. Both of these examples, students would have to understand what plagiarism is. They would have to understand the concerns related to plagiarism, but they would still be able to share their own voice and take it, one step further.
All right, so I'll talk a little bit about structuring information literacy courses. And this section in Hanstead's book was really interesting to me. And when we think about structuring any course, there are a lot of different approaches that you could take. I think a lot of us probably structure our courses based on how it's been taught before. Courses are often structured by subject areas, pulling by topics related to that particular subject area. A course could be structured chronologically, depending on the topic, taking students through a time period, for example. But my experience with information literacy courses my own, in addition to others that I have seen, is it often has this similar approach where perhaps in the initial weeks, we might do kind of an introduction to research. Then we talk about finding sources, then we talk about evaluating them. We then might talk a little bit about applying those sources, having that scholarly conversation, and then we wrap up by talking about citations and plagiarism. And this makes it look really simplistic, I know, and there's a lot that goes into all of these different sections. And this isn't necessarily a bad approach, but it does often culminate in one final assignment. And so it doesn't provide that opportunity then for students to face those increasingly complex problems. So I am going to share an approach that we took this summer when we were teaching an information literacy course with my colleagues. But before I share my approach, I am curious if there are some other ways that you all have structured information literacy courses. So if you want to go ahead and just post that in the chat, we don't have a Jamboard for this one. So if you have another structure, trying a variety of search strategies and evaluating the efficacy of each of those, that's a great idea. And I think it would help students get at some of those more advanced strategies based on what is or isn't working. And this question does apply more to those who are teaching those credit-bearing courses. And I don't know what, how many in our audience do the full course. But even when we're thinking about one-shots, I think we often will kind of structure it this way, where we might first talk about finding those sources and then evaluating them. Depending on time, we might get into some application of sources. All right, thanks, Garrett. So Garrett says he starts with source evaluation, then they compose a literature review. Next, compose a researched argument related to busting misinformation contexts, and then they wrap up. Students conclude with reflecting on what they learned about information literacy and argumentation. That's great. So it sounds like it's really focused on evaluation and building their skills in that area. Yeah, that's great. And I like that they're composing the literature review, it sounds like pretty early on, and then building from there. Critical rhetorical literacy, I'm assuming that's the name of the course. Great, thank you. Great, yeah, so thanks, Jane, for advancing the slide there. So these fun images here reflect some of our thinking about restructuring our course. And I probably should have flipped these images, but the image on the right, this is actually my initial thought process, where I was thinking we could have students in a credit-bearing course think about 3 different topics related to information literacy or information needs, and kind of engage in that research process with increasing levels of complexity. So we might start with the topic of information inequality and have students, maybe use the web, simpler evaluation strategies, and perhaps produce an infographic with a couple of sources. And then we move on to a new topic, a few weeks into the semester, and look at that with increasingly complex assignments. Well, then after talking with my colleagues, we were revising a course this summer on information literacy, and I shared this idea with my colleagues, and we decided to do something somewhat similar, but made some revisions in that we decided to structure the course, excuse me, around one topic while cycling through that research process a few different times. So that one topic was, why does information literacy matter? So as the course developed, students had the opportunity to develop more complex research questions. Excuse me, 1 second. I need to just take a drink of water. Okay, I think I'm better now. I needed to just really cough for a second. So with this model on the left, which is what we ended up doing, we had students look at this one topic of why information literacy matters. And they looked at it with increasingly complex research questions. So they started perhaps with more of just a general topic, thinking about it through the lens of misinformation or why plagiarism is important to information literacy. And then they took on greater levels of complexity as they engaged with their assignments. So the first assignment asked students to write an op-ed for their campus paper about why information literacy matters. Their final assignment was a poster that they presented to the campus community, where we invited folks from the campus to come and engage with students and their posters. So they had that same topic throughout the course, but it just built up with more complexity as they went. So Jane, if you want to go to the next slide. Because this transitions nicely then to thinking about wicked assignments and how we might rethink our assignments. And if you think about the goals that Jane was sharing, a lot of times the goals, right, are going to kind of dictate our assignments as well. But the thing to think about with assignments, and one of the big takeaways I had from the Hansted book, is this idea that we shift to the rhetorical focus when we're creating our assignments. Of course, if we are creating assignments where we ask students to write or present something for us as the professor, we are not giving students the opportunity to demonstrate their expertise. So I now think of my assignments as an opportunity to give students space to be an expert. Whenever I give an assignment to students now, I'll put something in there like, you have knowledge of this, you have learned about this through, weeks 1 through 4 or whatever. And so now you have the opportunity to showcase that knowledge. So a couple of assignment ideas. I talked about the write an op-ed for a campus newspaper. Another idea, in addition to having them write an op-ed about why information literacy matters, more current, you could have students write an op-ed about how to navigate election information. You could have students create an infographic, for example, where they have to teach regional K through 12 instructors about recognizing misinformation. You could also have them prepare a fact-checking report for the campus president on a relevant topic. For example, more recently, your campus president may have had to make decisions about whether or not students should be masking or if you should be mandating masking. So you could have students prepare a fact-checking report with that purpose in mind. And it doesn't always have to be an actual real situation. Perhaps you're not going to share that fact-checking report with the campus president. So I'll set it up as a fictional situation, but it still lets students kind of rethink who their audience is in those assignments. And then this is an activity that you would do. This isn't necessarily an assignment, but one thing Hansted talks about is this idea of first day pedagogies, and that we don't wait until later in the course to present students with complexity, but let them get right into it immediately, solve those wicked problems. So in an information literacy class, one idea, you could do an activity that asks students to engage with information in a really meaningful way. So provide students or a small group of students with an article or two, and then ask them to come up with 2 or 3 new research questions they might have after reading that article. And then you could have groups exchange those questions and then ultimately select 1 or 2 of the best questions from the class that day. And so this allows students to apply prior knowledge that they might already have about this. They can also learn from one another, where you'll have some students who maybe have engaged with this type of thing before and others who haven't. And it may not go, they may not come up with the very best questions, but that's okay. This isn't a graded assignment, right? So it gives them that space to practice being an expert, practice doing this work. And then when, they come back the next day, they can try it again, or in their assignment, they can try it again.
So another example that Hansted recommends is he calls the Think Again activity. So we have a statement up here on the screen. Plagiarism is illegal. Is this true? If you feel comfortable, post a response into the chat whether or not you think plagiarism is illegal is true. So we have a few responses coming in. False, not illegal. Yes, no, not illegal. Violation of policy, but it's not against the law. Nope, not illegal. No, question mark. Right, Garrett, the plagiarism, please arrest you and go to plagiarism jail. Yeah. Kathy shared, not illegal, but unethical. In some countries, copying someone else's ideas has been used as a way to learn. Yeah. So thank you all for sharing your responses there. We got most folks with the right answer that, oh, bye, Mary, that plagiarism is not illegal, but it is a violation of ethics. So it's ethically considered an ethical violation and not a legal violation. Although, of course, copyright infringement is a legal violation. And so this is basically an activity where you give students a statement where you think that students may be likely to get it wrong, or at least would be uncertain about. And I think especially with a statement like plagiarism is illegal, especially the way that plagiarism is often taught, where it is actually referred to as a crime. And I've seen this referred to in guidelines and resources that have been shared with students, that a good number of students might be uncertain about whether plagiarism is illegal. And so giving them this statement about whether or not it is illegal, letting them discuss it themselves, tell them what the correct answer is, but don't tell them why, and then have students work together to identify the correct answer, right? So this is an activity that's intended to, again, help students start to not only address some of the misconceptions that they might have, but to be able to work together to identify the right answer, to let them know that they already had the ability to find out and figure out what the right answer is. And so, this is the kind of a really quick activity that you could do with all kinds of different statements related to research or information sharing, that you could get students to sort of break out of that, think outside the box of how things might have been presented to them, or, misunderstandings, misconceptions that they might have developed over time. So we wanted to pause there to see if folks have any questions, any activities or ideas that they would like to share to make things a little bit more wicked. So Lynn shared, love this activity, great way you can incorporate Wicked IL into a one-shot. Yeah, and definitely if you read the book, he gives tons of examples of different kinds of activities, and some are definitely meant more for credit courses, but some could definitely be used in a one-shot session.
And I would say even the first day pedagogies, I think, that obviously is presented in the book as, an entire class session. But I think the point is, even in a one shot, you could get students to engage right away in complexity.
So if questions or ideas come in, please feel free to go ahead and add those in the chat. Let's see what we have come in, have to run. Thank you, David. We did just want to share some resources that we have that might be helpful to folks. One resource I wanted to mention, we have on our Ohio State Teaching and Learning Resource Center, we have this Information Literacy Concepts and Teaching Strategies Guide. So that is available for and that's not just for Ohio State folks, it's on our site, but anyone can take a look at that, and we have resources identifying all the core concepts, learning bottlenecks related to those concepts, teaching strategies and activities, and a few example activities as well. So those are resources that are available to everyone. We also have an instructor resources at University Library site. This has all kinds of resources related to teaching research and information literacy, search tools, research questions, information sources. Again, all of this stuff is available to other folks to use as well. So it doesn't just have to be Ohio State folks using those. And then I also wanted to mention that we've developed for each of the core concepts for the framework for information literacy, we've developed sort of individual concept guides that are available. So here's the example of one for authority is constructed and contextual that has a brief introduction to it, a video, a description of the concept, and some identification of the related knowledge practices and dispositions. So those resources are available as well for anyone to use. So just wanted to make sure to share those with everyone. And I think that will So I went through all of those. Andrew, did you want to mention the Gear Up resources?
Yeah, I just put a couple of links on there. I think we have a couple of folks from NKU on this call. We have so at NKU we have an initiative called Gear Up with Information Literacy, where we provide a lot of faculty and staff development on information literacy and how to integrate it into courses. So I put a link on the PowerPoint to a page that has some faculty and staff resources linked there. And the big thing I would point out, and this is on that page, is our Gear assignment repository that we've developed where, and this is actually an open Canvas page, so I think others could get into it as well. But essentially it is assignments that various folks at NKU, librarians, and some of our information literacy ambassadors who have engaged with Gear Up have developed assignments and activities to be used in the classroom that align with these different areas of Gear Up.
So yeah, I don't know why it's very small there with that one. For some reason I got off on this odd link there. So that's the end of our presentation in terms of content that we had. We do have some time for some questions, comments, just a few minutes, a couple of things that have come in. Garrett shared, I love the idea of throwing students into the information literacy deep end from the get-go. Yep. Scott shared, highly recommend Natasha and Jones' recent article, Citation Practices Shifting Paradigms. I'm definitely excited to read that. I actually think I saw a presentation that she gave that really influenced my thinking on this, the concept of citations and how we teach plagiarism. So definitely we'll check that out.
I just clicked on the link.
Let's see. So Garrett does have the teaching information literacy certificate and recommends that others as well. So yeah, if you are associated with Ohio State, please let me know if you're interested in earning that teaching information literacy certificate. Can talk you through the options there. Let's see. Thank you everyone. We did have one question. What kind of faculty response have you had to Gear Up?
Yeah, Sherry, so Gear Up is our campus's quality enhancement plan. We're accredited by SACS COC, so the QEP is a component of that. So that has helped in terms of engagement because it's something that the entire campus engages with, and the campus also voted for information literacy as the topic. Jane was actually at NKU when it was selected and was a big part of having that proposal move through. But so we've had about 35 faculty engage as Gear Up ambassadors. So we're to the point now where we are now working with it's a pretty good group. So we're working with the current group and thinking about programmatic information literacy and how to embed information literacy beyond just one course. But yeah, I could talk a lot more about it. If you have questions and want to email me about it, I'd be happy to.
So we also had, how do you balance throwing them in the deep end with not overwhelming them?
I think that's a very good question. But again, I think it goes back to kind of setting up that space and setting it up as a safe space. You know, if you were going to give them like that activity with research questions and you were going to grade them on the very first day, I'd say that's a little bit more overwhelming than, you know, roaming the room and helping students engage in that process and letting them mess up and being okay with that. So I think it has a lot to do with how you set up the classroom.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Andrea. So we also had, I love the anti-classism and anti-white supremacy approach to information literacy in this approach. Yeah, and there was a great presentation yesterday at the Critical Information Literacy and Pedagogy Symposium on the white language and the framework. Really interesting. So thank you everyone. So great to see everyone. Thank you. I will gonna go ahead and stop recording now, but we'll stick around to see if there are any last questions. Thank you all so much for being here today. It was great to have a chance to talk with you about this concept and this topic that's become really important to both of us.
Yes, thank you all. It was great to be here.